Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Welcome to Mesa County Compass, folks. This afternoon we are having a couple of our city council members on. We have BenVanDyke and we have Scott Beilfuss, and they are going to answer some questions for us, we hope.
Yes.
Welcome, guys.
Thanks, and we really appreciate you coming on.
Yes, we do.
It is, and it's fun. I mean, for us. It might not be fun for you, but it's fun for us.
I appreciate that you guys do it. I think it's awesome that you guys are as engaged as you are, so I really enjoy it.
Well, we'll start with some engagement we had last night. And I want to ask both of you, what did you think about Amber Martinez's statements? I want to get your reaction and what you feel like after hearing her experience and what you could do about it.
It's probably going to be hard for Ben because he wasn't in on all those negotiations and stuff. And it's kind of hard for me because a lot of them were executive session. So,
and what does that mean when you say executive session?
So typically executive session is private. It's agendized, but it does say executive session, so there's no public allowed. And it's usually high-level personnel or land purchases. So that's where a lot of this stuff was done.
So were you part of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were part of the executive sessions.
Yeah, but it's top secret.
But what did you think? Top secret or not? I mean, what did you think about what they did?
Well, there's more to it than came out last night, as you can imagine.
Not for her.
Well, I had not read. I pulled the Business Times article up as soon as we started. I knew it came from Business Times because they kind of don't report the full amount. Who does these days? It's hard. Nobody does the heavy lift these days and calls a bunch of people and spends as much time as they should on the whole thing. So
I disagree with that. Everything that they had was documented.
Well,
in the Business Times.
But they didn't follow all the way through, I don't think. Well, it did say in the article that they got, I can't remember how it was worded. They ended up getting $1.4 million out of the thing, and it started at 980,000, and then they asked for 4.9 million. So the communication was not good between them and the city and the state.
Between them, they needed to do the communication when you're taking their property.
Well, when somebody reaches out to you and says, there's interest in this, obviously they talk to somebody a little bit because they countered with the 4.9 million.
I think you need to get your dates straight,
but
because 2021 is, they said the first time they knew that they were in that whole thing was when the Daily Sentinel came out and said, this is the property that they are looking at for the new your mobility hub.
Yeah, I didn't, that was before we got involved.
Well, I know it was before you got involved because you
Right.
didn't come on until 2023.
Yeah, 23, yeah. So.
But what do you think about doing that to people? If that's the first time you have a business, how would you feel, Ben, if that had happened to you?
Well, I have a little different perspective of it because Mike and Amber are my neighbors. They've been our neighbors with the car wash for 20 plus years at this point. So I have a personal relationship with Mike and Amber. And we also kind of were dealing with a lot of, the other things going on in the downtown area between 4th and 5th Street and the Resource Center. So we had really come together, kind of united as a downtown business front kind of through this period. So I had a little different perspective of it, kind of more seeing what Mike and Amber were going through. And it was just so many different things happening in succession that it was hard to not look at things and start to wonder, are these things being done for a reason? Or is this just coincidence that things are happening this way? I know one of the main things they really struggled with was whether or not the resource center was placed across the street from their business to essentially kind of drive the value down of their business and kind of help that negotiation process. And I don't know whether or not that's the case. I think it probably has a lot more to do with our previous city manager.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, than the actual nefarious activity of all of these things lining up to work against them. But with that being said, I also didn't really ever see anyone come to their support or to their aid. I know they wanted to continue their business on at a different location, and instead of all partners really working towards finding an alternate location that worked well for their family, it seemed like there were a lot of roadblocks that were put in place, whether that be through previous zoning and code that limits where car dealerships can actually operate within the city. But they were even in a position where they were looking at different properties for different business ventures to even expand out and do something different. So I see it in two ways. I kind of, in some ways, I understand why they wanted that property. In other ways, I don't feel like it's the right thing to do to force a business that's operated in our city for 20 years in a certain location out of their property without actually giving them an opportunity to improve their business. Something a lot of people don't know about the car washes is the building at our downtown site has actually been moved twice. It was originally at First and Grand where the KED Plasma building was, and we leased that property. When they built Rite Aid there, they had moved us over by the courthouse, and we bought that property over by the courthouse by where Burger King is before the courthouse was built. And then when the county decided they wanted to build the courthouse, they actually had come to us and said, hey, we want your property, but we want to buy this lot on 3rd and Ute from Wells Fargo, and we want to do the infrastructure to get you guys set up so that we can actually move you there at no cost to you, which in the long term benefited our business because it was a much better location than what we really had. So I think in these situations where we need somebody's property, we have to make sure that we're leaving them in a better situation than what we found them in.
Or at least as good.
Well, I mean, as good as hard too, because what's the point? I mean, there's no win for them with as good.
Exactly.
So it's not like they want it out of this property and they're happy to have sold it. This was a property that really worked well for them, for their business, and finding a suitable replacement for that is almost impossible. So I wish there could have been more that could have been done to help set them up for the future, so that we could have protected them as well as, looking for the future on how we're going to build downtown Grand Junction as well.
The mobility hub.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I look, being 261 Ute Avenue, where the resource center sits, that's the lot that divides my property from GJ Auto's property. So I look at the situation and think, this could have very easily been the other side. And the car wash could have been in the exact same situation. So I think we can do better. I really do. I think we have to protect our citizens, our neighbors. I think moving forward, we have to be, it's hard because some of these things you can't be purely transparent on. It's like Scott says, what's in executive session and what's not in executive session isn't really our choice. It's kind of, once it is those higher level, like the real estate acquisitions or high level hires, it automatically goes into that because they're trying, it's the same thing with like the North Avenue purchase for the resource center. It wasn't so much that it was trying to be hidden, it was just that property acquisition has to go through executive session, so then it becomes private. So we might even have some policy issues that need to be fixed on that front as well. So that we do have the community engagement piece still. It's just finding the ways to make that legally work for everyone.
Well, I mean, it's not just the legal part, it's also a market-driven part in that okay, the city's got a leaf blower full of money, and if people find out that we're looking at that property, which may be before the property owner even knows, we have that discussion, and all of a sudden it comes out, oh, the city's looking at the property, it just went up 25% because the city's interested. So the executive session protects us a little bit on that whole thing, keeping it private until some kind of deal is done on those larger transactions. So it's I am trying to remember, I think there was 2, maybe 3 executive sessions about that property. The state was actually the one pushing the condemnation
Why
piece.
weren't you pushing back and saying, the county, I know, offered property to you and to CDOT and said, we'll give you this property pretty much across the street and we'll throw in $100,000.
Which property was that?
It's described in there. I think it's the property.
Yeah, I saw that, but I didn't. Oh, I know which one. Wasn't it across from Good Judy's?
Yeah.
That one that they bought on the corner?
What's wrong with that? I mean, it doesn't have to be ideal. It could be good. And it has to be what's best for everybody involved. There was nothing going on over there.
Well, I think one of the problems with that property is that it's landlocked because there's parking lots all around owned by the county. So we would have got that square, but the vision was to have an additional spot. You've seen the master plan, sort of, in that where the resource center would be commercial development and a place for commercial buses to pull up there. Commercial is not going to go in that roundabout transport center. That's pretty much going to be multimodal and city buses, which are of all sizes. But, so they have a whole plan for that all.
And why weren't they using more of that land on the resource center? Why? Because the way that it's described, and I'm saying it's Business Times, but the way it's described in the Business Times, you're just using a small sliver of what was part of the resource center, and then their property was where most of it's going. What about if you were to move that over and just not have the whole thing at the same place? I'm just saying, it seems to me like executive session.
We should pull up the picture. I think it would be pretty clear what the plan was, as far as that goes. And, they're big buses. You can't just turn them on a dime. So
that's true.
So it's a challenge that way. I'm not sure. I know some of those other properties were in the conversation, but I don't know what happened with them. But a lot of that stuff was being driven by the state because they were paying the bill, right? On the whole plan.
But how did that start? Where did the plan start from? It wasn't CDOT came in and said, oh, you need a multimodal. It was the city applying for a grant to say, and then letting CDOT come in and direct, because you can't push all of that away and always say it's somebody else's fault. And I can give you an example.
Well, I think the whole plan was the state. I mean, if you look at
they started
the request
plan
for
and they
proposal was
came from the state.
All the state, yeah. I think, and that whole little corner project was almost $20 million. I mean, it's a big dollar project. I don't know why it's so expensive, but relocating all those utilities and all that stuff. I was curious, Ben, how much communication did you get from anybody during the whole process?
I only knew what I knew because I was having conversations with Mike, and they were very private, because I know the Martinezes, they're a very private family. They're very faith-based, and they didn't want to cause a scene during the process because I had told Mike multiple times, like, hey, I think you should talk to the Sentinel. I think you should talk to somebody about this. I'm like, just let the public know what you're going through here and the fight. And I would essentially wake up every morning and I'd Google 123 Ute Avenue, and I'd look for CDOT documentation to pop up to see if anything had happened or if it had popped through. And that's actually how I had found the consent agenda for the last October meeting, or not the consent agenda, the executive session for that last October meeting when it was voted on. And I think it just, whether that's the right property or the wrong property, I understand why they wanted it there, just with the location to the train station across the street, leading over to Yep. And I understand why. I think where we got so messed up was in the process and the communication, you know,
And the outcome.
and the outcome.
Yes, exactly.
The Martinezes should never have learned about it through the paper. They should have been contacted.
Sounds like Whitman Park.
Exactly. They should have been contacted, and it should have been an open discussion from the beginning to really help them guide their future forward, to know if maybe we remodel this building, maybe we don't remodel this building, maybe we look for the next site. It's also my understanding that a lot of this was CDOT led up until very recently, that essentially when negotiations started to break down between the Martinez family and CDOT, that's kind of when CDOT brought the city and the county to the table, which has only been, I think, probably less than a year that I think the city and the county actually really got involved, because CDOT was trying to handle the negotiations on their own, and the Martinez,
was pretty heavy-handed.
exactly, and the Martinez family kind of got in a bind, and they had also, they had been fighting over egress on their lot for the previous 6 months and had hired an attorney to fight CDOT over egress on their lot. And it's just all these little things that you have to start to wonder, are these things connected, or is this just the perfect storm of whammies kind of all coming at once, that it's just, it's, we no longer worried about egress, we want your property, the resource centers across the street, 4th and 5th, we're doing the CDOT project, so we're going to tear up all access in and out of there. And it was just so many things all at once that it's hard not to look at it and say, hey, where could we have done better? Where could we have helped? Where could we have pumped the brakes? We have to have a human aspect to these things. It's really easy from a city perspective to look at things from a very legalistic view and say we can do this, we can't do this based on the law.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have to set the morals on the table right next to the laws.
Put that human element in there.
Exactly, and realize it's a family and it's Grand Junction citizens and it's our neighbors, and how do we protect our neighbors? So,
Because the city's for the people that live in it, not
Right, they're
against the people
taxpayers,
that
right? We're going after our
And
own.
eminent domain
Yeah.
should be the
Yes.
very last resort.
and even
In-
though it wasn't used, the fact that it was threatened,
There you
it
go.
means it was used. Because I know personally, if someone threatens eminent domain on me, I'm going to be much more eager to negotiate a sale, because I know whether or not I choose to do this, you're taking my property from me.
And I've been subject to the eminent domain threat, so I know how that feels, and it isn't pretty, and you don't wind up with what your value actually is. You wind up with something less than that, and that's what the Martinezes did.
Well, and I think,
And I do understand that they were asking more for the property than probably it was worth, but then they were hoping to be able to negotiate the in-between from the high and the low and come up with something that might be satisfactory for all parties. Didn't work that way.
and it's so hard too, because it is, are we looking at the value of this property as if they were just a family wanting to sell the property and had enough of it? Or are we looking at the value of the property like they have to relocate a business to a different property?
Right.
Because you come up with two very different values.
Exactly.
Because if you look at the replacement costs of what they have there, even though that building's a little bit older, the property's a little bit older, if they did remodel that, they would have a very valuable site. So you couldn't come in and build that site for $1.4 million with that kind of traffic count coming by there. So the actual replacement cost is much higher, but it's how do you find something that's the same level, in the same access, in the same price range, and then that's when I think things get really convoluted.
Well, and you've got in the discussions with them, and I was in on none of that stuff, looking at what the history of the property is, it hasn't been kept up, right? So for them to come in kind of later, and I'm not blaming them for the whole thing, it's just that communications, since it started in 21 and didn't finish until 24, There's 3 years in there to have some good conversations, and I don't think that happened at all. So then you're just dealing with what's in front of you, and what's in front of you in that spot was a slice of pie, part of which the city owned, right? We own a little piece of that, that hadn't been fixed up, improved, or anything, for as long as they've had it. So to come back and say, wait a minute, we were just going to build, a 4-story office building here. It's kind of like.
But hadn't they started some of that?
Yeah, they started some of the remodel already before it's all started.
Where was it? Because I'm down there a lot.
I think they're upstairs.
They were doing interior work.
Yeah. And apparently they had a renter there that was a photography person. But,
so that could be.
Is it your right to judge and say, well, you're not keeping your property up, so we can take it?
But that's not it.
That sounds like what you were saying.
That's not it. No,
what
I'm just saying in negotiations, in reality, you can't bring, future thoughts to the table at the last minute. It's like, okay, wait. Now if they came to the table and said, look, we have an engineering plan, we have an architectural plan that's been in place for a year, we're ready to go, we got a line of credit from the bank. I mean, that would mean a lot to either of us as far as evidence goes of that.
But did you hear what they said about not being able to get loans and stuff since they're losing the property?
Right.
But Scott, you took the property and you were saying that they weren't informed, they weren't part of the negotiations, and frankly,
that
was
the community, their choice, I believe.
Community was not even asked, how important is multimodal to Grand Junction? That vision is the vision of, I know that you say that's
a different issue.
No, it is kind of the same issue, because you're looking back and saying the way the city has been being directed is not engaging with the community before you start something, and saying, I know that the Downtown Development Authority wanted that because they see that as very helpful to them. But did the community as a whole think this is the best use of resources over the long run? And I actually have an interesting thing that the Bike and Ped group, this is Grand Valley Alliance, and this is on their resources line. This is real disturbing to me. The best ways to fund infrastructure. And do you mind reading that, Ben?
People for Bike's Senior Director for Infrastructure, David Snyder, will discuss how local and state funding for bike projects is essential to take advantage of an unprecedented amount of federal funding that often requires a local match.
Okay, so if I want to do something that engages that particular thing, and this doesn't necessarily, this is stage one.
So what did it say? I didn't
it's
quite
saying
get it
if
all.
you want to have something that the community doesn't necessarily think is that important, the best way to get what you want is to do a grant for a matching fund and then move that on. And Urban Trails Committee has done that on several different
places. Yeah.
And this one bothered me last year.
Back when there were grants.
A letter of support, August 14th, 2024. On behalf of Grand Junction's Urban Trail Committee, we are pleased to express our support for the Grand Valley Regional Transportation Planning Office in their application to the U.S. Department of Transportation for funding demonstration of safe streets and roads for all projects. But down here is where this isn't even true. As a city, fairly compact in geography, predominantly sunny weather, and flat topography, Grand Junction and the surrounding valley lend themselves well to walking, bicycling, and other active transportation modes. However, the risks of sharing space with speeding motor vehicles, especially those operated by impaired drivers, create a high level of concern, and rightfully so. By evaluating the efficacy of treatments like speed feedback signage, intersection hardening, and education campaigns, Mesa County and the RTPO will demonstrate that we can and will make a difference in the safety of our public infrastructure. Okay, how many people ride their bikes to commute in Grand Junction?
1,268.
It's not true, because they gave you that
She asked me.
just a couple of weeks ago when we were there. They gave you the report, and actually
That doesn't count students though.
And actually, the number of people riding, it was 2.3%, I believe, that ride their bikes to commute. Yep, there it is right there. And it had gone down from 2018 when we got our bronze award. And if you look at the
But like I
community
said,
that
it doesn't include students, so I mean that could double or triple it easily.
why, how do you know it doesn't include students? Does it say there it doesn't
Well,
include
it
students?
says people biking to work. Kids would not fit that, right?
I think it's people that are using it to commute, as opposed to people that are
I don't think
recreationally
so.
riding.
I think it's just people going to work. They're pretty specific on those sort of things. So regardless, we have a growing biking community here. I think we should work with them. People
How did you
move
say
here
that
because
when
of
it says 2.3 here, and it's lower than 2018 when they did the same study?
Their methods change. I don't know. I'm not going to argue with you that not
Okay.
everybody rides a bike.
The bike stuff has gotten so politicized as well that it's one of those things too where it's like we need to take a step back and look at what we're really trying to do with bike infrastructure.
Yes.
Are we really trying to create safe pathways for families to get around town, for kids to ride their bikes, or is it more about the commuters that are trying to get back and forth to work? You know, I know personally, if I'm taking my kids out bike riding, I'm not going to go down the bike lane on 4th and 5th Street because
Right.
I'm not going to feel
Right.
safe.
Right.
But for the commuter that's going to use that bike lane, it's a different situation. They're probably going to feel safer. Now, in my opinion, that's probably a smaller portion of the bike community overall. But I also think that we can all look at it and say, hey, we want safe infrastructure for bikes. We just don't want it at the expense of vehicles. We want great bike pathways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look at...
Which you have at the Riverfront project.
Yeah, but
That is absolutely, the Riverfront Trail is absolutely great for family bike riding.
I even look at like
Recreation.
CMU though, and how they've got, you know, they've built larger sidewalks, and they've got a bike section and they've got a pedestrian section. And I think personally, like if I'm riding with my children, I feel more comfortable on that separated sidewalk with my children anyway than I would feel adjacent to vehicles.
Absolutely.
So the way I look at the bike infrastructure, it's less about bikes versus vehicles and more about how do we incorporate the bike infrastructure so that it works with our current infrastructure. Whether that be completely, you know, pathways that are completely separated from traffic so that there isn't a chance of having these interactions between vehicles and bikes, or whether it be we find ways to do it on streets that, you know, aren't as heavy of thoroughfares. But I don't think it's such a bike versus pedestrian thing that, we've really all gotten so into that. It's more about, hey, this is Grand Junction. Some of us bike, most of us drive. We all do these things. How can we make a Grand Junction that's just a really great place for everybody, that it works well for everyone, not at the expense of one group or the other?
Well, and I think more is how much do we spend to get this? You know, it doesn't have to be every single street. Do you know about complete streets?
Mm-hmm.
When did you learn about that?
Probably during my campaigning.
No?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know about that before? And you know about complete streets?
I'm not sure.
The policy that we have in Grand Junction that came from the Urban Trails Committee, that is a policy for Grand Junction. And it says that at the heart of the Complete Streets policy is the intent for communities to build streets that safely accommodate all modes of transportation. And while the city has historically incorporated complete street concepts in the design of transportation corridors, this policy memorializes that commitment for all transportation-related projects. And so it's long been a long-standing goal and the desire of the Urban Trails Committee, whose planning jurisdiction is limited to Persigo 201 service area, to develop and adopt complete streets policy, which says that every single street that is paved has to have multimodal. And
Right.
and
yeah.
that's not
I think
realistic.
we're going to talk about that.
That's
Yeah.
not real. And that
I'm
policy
not
is
sure it
coming
is
through Urban
realistic.
Trails, not through City Council and not through the community. That's what. So it's not bikes versus. It's why every single street, at what cost, and what other projects that are important to the community could that money be used for?
Right.
And realistically,
'Cause
and
we have
I know
so
Pete
much.
Bellers has sent information to you saying what streets reasonably accommodate, not that we have to have
Right.
every single
Yeah.
street do this, because look at the cost if you
But
did
that's
every
a hard
single
one to
street.
call too, because okay, you say to the two developers right next to each other, yours is going to be a main multimodal route. Yours isn't. It's kind of like the undergrounding thing, and your undergrounding was only on one side of the road. So if you designate one development as being the main one, that might cost them an extra 5%. That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
But the other one doesn't get designated, and he's going, well, why didn't I? Why? Who
So
made
we
this
charge
rule
both
up?
more
Well, I
and
don't
make
know.
it
I mean,
much
that
more
is an
affordable?
option, of course. That it goes in the common pot. Here's the other thing that let me just throw this
Okay,
out real
I
quick
will.
because I've been here for a long time. So some of this comes back to two things. One is a lack of foresight in our past. I've been here 40 years. I moved here. I previously lived in Milwaukee and in Madison, in Wisconsin. Madison jumped into the bike thing like 50 years ago. And it was way ahead of the game on that whole thing. And it was like, a lot of us were going, why are we putting all these bike lanes in? Now it's massively used, but they're separate bike lanes. It goes right through urban areas, and it's like a 12-foot bike path. So they've got it down. Now, nobody had the foresight to think about those sort of things when they were planning the city. And so now we're trying to do some catch up. The other thing is that so much of there was no collaboration with the county on anything. So we'd have areas growing into additional development areas with bike lanes and sidewalks, and you hit the county and it's dirt road. I mean, they didn't have anything. So, the vision was not shared and collaborated on. And, we're just trying to catch up on a lot of that stuff.
And the vision was not shared with the community.
Well, I think it probably was at the time. Who knows? But, it's...
I'm sure that it wasn't,
some of the
because-
things that you say, who knows? Well, if you don't know, then you can't say who
it
knows.
was 40,
How do you know?
It was 40, 50 years ago. I mean, we can
Well,
certainly
I'm
look
just-
it up. I'd be
I'm
happy
just
to,
saying
but I don't know what we're going to
the
accomplish. by
vision-
50
doing
years
that.
ago, we had
vision-
horse and buggy.
Yeah, the
Not
vision,
really.
though, I'm saying right now, none of the visions, a lot of these things happen because it's your vision as a city council
That's our job.
not going out to the community and saying,
That's not our
what
job.
what is your vision for the community? Why isn't it your job? Do you think it's your
Well,
job?
No, I
No.
said it's not our job to, it is our job to do things for the community. They voted for us. We have to make decisions and make visions. It is also our job to communicate, and we are working on that hard.
And that is, I think, something that we really plan on improving moving forward. I mean, we are talking about a lot of things right now, adding an additional council meeting that would be more of a roundtable discussion style meeting instead of just 3 minutes of public comment. We can actually have dialogue with people, direct staff to answer questions, make sure people actually are feeling heard within our community, and possibly rotating that around the community so we're hitting different area codes around town or different zip codes around town. We've
That's a great thing.
also talked about, and something I really want to push for is our community meetings to be funneled through a different department than the actual department that's leading the project. So if we're having a community meeting about a street project, instead of it being led by our engineering department, our communication department's actually leading the meeting and handling the engagement. But our engineering department is still there to actually answer questions and to give feedback. But we're making sure that that information from the community isn't watered down by the time it actually makes it all the way up through to council. Because it is hard once it passes through 3 or 4 people. Things kind of get, even if it's not intentional, they just change a little bit as it makes.
Convoluted,
Yes,
yes.
exactly, as it gets to council. So for council to have real solid information that this is what the community said in this stakeholder group, and nothing about it is watered down, it's true. I think we're really moving forward towards having
Totally.
some really great community
Yep.
engagement. And I do give Scott a lot of credit. He is everywhere all the time.
You are,
And
and I give you credit for
yeah,
that too.
and
Agreed.
But sometimes you give back platitudes and it's not concrete.
Probably.
Yeah.
You got to give me a little time
Leeway?
to dig into things. I'm
Yeah.
a pretty good researcher, but I got a lot of balls in the air too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely an issue. Now, some of that communication thing came from our very first meeting when you guys were complaining about communications.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we came up with were those.
Going out to the different centers. Because it was on 29
Yeah.
Road.
Right.
And
Okay.
that and the more Daytronic signs like by Lincoln Park.
Mhm,
I thought that was the greatest idea. Put up some other ones around town, that sort of thing. So I've had a lot of conversations with Michael Bennett, and he's all for it. And they got a new person here now. The thing they have to keep in mind is that what the city thinks is right and what council thinks is right are two different things sometimes, because we're private sector, they're big government.
Mm-hmm.
And we've run for office, we've been salespeople, we've been small business owners, and a lot of times you have to say, wait a minute, this is not what we're thinking. We want you to really, we don't want to put out a sign and say, come to our meeting and, we'll split you up into little groups and you can talk to somebody if you have time. No, we want a lot more open, a lot more robust, kind of communications. I don't know that, you don't get a ton of people for some of these meetings. So we have to try some things. We have to not be afraid to fail.
And people always show up for what they're interested in.
Well, and what
So they
know
need
about-
to
what they
know
know
what's out there to be
Well,
interested
and we
in.
need some carrots for them to come. I said, let's start our meetings. It's just the other day. I said, let's start our meetings with things that people don't know but would really enjoy knowing. Like the Winco store going out here. Hardly anybody knows about that. And I believe that is moving along, fairly quickly. So, that's a big deal. I think Panini Grill's coming here. There's a bunch of other things. People don't know about those things yet.
Mm-hmm.
They maybe aren't quite ready for prime time communications, but I think people would like to know about that. What else are we doing? We're thinking about parks with the new developments, where they're going to be. And I got to say too, slowing down the whole process too much
Amen.
is
Slow it down.
is exactly what the developers are saying not to do. They want answers. Time is money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a small business. I have to make decisions all day, every day. Boom, 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 boom. Fix things, get on. And so there's got to be somewhere in between. We have to make a decision, right? Hopefully the right one. Can we pivot on that? Heck yeah. We're going to pivot on some of those zoning things, I believe. And so, there's got to be a little balance. We'll try some things. I think we have to include outside experts. I consider you guys experts with communicating certain should be in on the planning process.
Thank you, because that's what, and again, I think even though you think that the city council is who creates the vision, maybe before you start a vision, or you say, hey, this is an idea, let's see if this is something that the community has an appetite for. Because some of this stuff, they say, this is not even something I want or think that would be good, or it's too expensive at the time. Because and this is totally off the subject, but last night when you guys had the evaluation from your fiscal things, I looked at both of you and you had no idea what they were talking about.
That was a terrible
But
That was really
thing.
well,
really bad.
it's just like I'm going through this, and city council, there's no way you could have understood what do those numbers mean.
Well, and they were pretty vague
Yes.
numbers.
Very
Yes,
vague.
and then they said on top of that, we're not responsible for inaccurate information. Is basically what they said.
So,
So
good
it
luck,
was
buddies.
wasted
You should have
time.
saved your
And so how much do we pay for that?
$150,000,
Yeah,
right?
and you're sitting there,
No,
what
Dennis
is that
Simpson
going to do
always
for
went
you?
after that whole process,
And then
as
they
you
ask
might
you, do you
remember.
have any questions? And nobody knew what they were talking
deer in the
about.
headlights
What
look
kind
from
of
everybody.
question?
I mean, all seven of
You
you.
know, the budget book's like 3 inches thick. So
Well, and we did have about a 400-page packet, so we had a lot of background information on it already, but
But
it wasn't.
who
and-
understood it though? The way he was relating it was not
And
understandable
it's
either.
so much of what I see is that we just set these vague goals without any real measurable benchmarks.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's easy to say that we're meeting our goals. If you say we want to increase recycling next year, well, what is that? Is that a cardboard box? Is that an aluminum can? Or is that 2 extra tons, 40 extra tons? What are we talking about? What are our real measurable goals? So I think it's actually setting some measurable goals within our policy to say, hey, are we meeting this? Are we not meeting this? If we're not meeting this, we need to address it. If we are meeting this, great. We're doing what we're set out to do. But actually, instead of having these vague documents that can be interpreted essentially any way you really want to read them, have documents with some real measurable goals and standards and priorities that we want as a council to look at. And, you know, I don't think it's council's job to set the priorities for our community. I look more at council, we're a conduit. It's our job. It's our job to gather information from people and to move that forward to the city. This isn't about what we personally want, our personal views. It's about what we're hearing from the people, what the community wants, and how we can bring that to staff.
Make it a reality.
Exactly, because we are the bridge. Because staff is their nose is in the paper. They are in a project. They are working on their project. I mean, it's like I said earlier. It's their baby. When they are working on a road project, a park, anything, that's blood, flesh, and tears into that project. So when the community comes out and says, we don't really like this, to expect them not to take that personal,
of course they would.
It's human nature.
Any of us would do that.
It's human nature. Mm-hmm. So how do we put some guardrails in place that we actually get that feedback, have that feedback guide the project forward in the way that the community likes it, so that when we do roll it out, it's not such a
us versus them project.
Yeah, well, and a surprise too.
Yeah.
It's, hey, we've already talked about this. We've already communicated it. This is what we've heard from you. This is what we brought to it, and this is where we came together and compromised in the middle.
Well, the whole thing, it boils down to communication. If you can communicate, people will agree. I mean, they agree to disagree on cases, but for the majority, you're going to have agreement and a general consensus, and that helps you move forward.
So with all the options, I mean, I was in sales. We communicate with our customers. I was a lot of direct, group presentations, a lot of direct mail, a lot of posters up and that sort of thing. So it was very simple 35 years ago. Now, oh my God, we have so many ways to communicate. Somebody doesn't like this, somebody doesn't like that. You know, I would be very interested by demographics, what people's top 3 or 4 ways to communicate with the city would be preferred, know, and then let's go with that. I always ask Kate, why don't you put a little thing in with those water bills that we get every month in the mail? Oh no, we can't do that. It throws the weight off on the bulk mailing thing, and it's like, are you kidding me? I did this all the time. So I think there's opportunities to communicate with everybody, but there has to be some agreement. Okay, this is the way it's going to be. This is, and there's a lot of new people coming in. Let them know what's going on. So, I mean, you guys do a little survey. I mean, see what
what you're going to find, I think, is your social media and your direct mail are going to be the two.
And Scott, that's
for our
brilliant
age
to
group?
put it
Yes.
in. Well, that's brilliant to put it in with the water bill. And I think that you go back and you just ask, show me, prove to me that would be so much more. And don't give people great big chunks, because what I noticed so I'm sure you passed all that code last night, but did you have to? Was that a requirement?
It wasn't a lot, actually. It was just updates,
It's a lot, because you were here when we talked Eisman Construction at that table right out there, and they were telling you all of the costs that it increases for somebody doing even a project.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the new code things. Yeah. And do we have to have all of those things? Because it's like, well, that's on the agenda. We'll pass it. But without looking at the impact to people.
That wasn't what we did.
Most of the stuff last night was, I think, more cleanup, redundancies in language, essentially. But with that being said, something I think Scott and I have both talked with like the HBA and different groups about is we want to bring a group of professionals together that are dealing with the code, that are dealing with zoning on a daily basis. The people that are actually seeing the speed bumps and the hurdles out there that can help us point out the inefficiencies and help us fix these things so that we can actually
and go back to the state and say, this is because you have said, and I know this is one of your desires, and I truly believe it is, affordable housing. But everything in that code makes it less affordable for somebody trying to build.
And you add more all the time.
And so, like they said, we let it go for a year, but all of the things in there, you do have access to those people right now. I mean, there's no reason why you weren't talking to those people and asking them. And for you to find a way to say, how do we tell the state or wherever that particular regulation is coming from, is it something we need to implement or can we save? Because a lot of the things that they were talking about, that adds $5,000 to the cost. If you have to put in something like a new homes would have to have an electric vehicle thing, that's $5,000.
Like
I mean, all of that stuff adds. And then does it make housing more affordable? No.
So there's got to be some compromise, and people have to come to the table. Maybe we need mediators and all these things. Maybe we do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's kind of like setting the goal and working back from there. And we don't do that very much. Very much, as you all know, the chamber and the builders are coming. And we can't. The more you put this on, we can't build affordable housing. And we were going like, well, we're not building affordable housing now. What more do you need? And so I believe that, we kind of overreached on a lot of those zoning things to fill a vision of Grand Junction stepping up from, lower middle class to upper middle class community. Maybe we should look like Fort Collins. Maybe we should look like Broomfield, that sort of thing. And, it sounded good for a while, and then I was like, this isn't going to work, but there was a lot of other things at play too, the tariffs and the embargo. I mean, everything that was going on.
That didn't have any impact. I'm sorry.
A little bit. So,
a little bit,
it's
not
death
enough.
by 100 cuts, right?
Yeah.
So
But
now,
if you can stop the cuts, do it.
some of them, sure. And
Whatever
we only
cut
have
you can stop,
control
do
over
it.
what we have control over. So lately, and I did this morning together, and meeting with a group that was talking about applying for some money with the city, and I said, I'll tell you what, it's got to be a give and take deal. I mean, we're going to, from now on, we're going to give you some money, but we have shortages in what our citizens believe the way you operate. And we want that addressed before any checks are written. And it's that way with the builders to me too. It's like, okay, we are going to give, but you have never said exactly what we're going to get in return. And we need homes for under $400,000. Okay, let's start there. And how do we, give and take on that whole deal? We're not asking for every home in this community to be under $400,000.
Right.
We just need to meet our goals. And for economic development, we are not going to move forward unless we have affordable single-family homes in this area. We're not that attractive,
Right.
We are attractive, but we're not,
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a little squeaming. They get a little squeamish about, when you talk about those tight terms. But some of the builders will. Hopefully next week I'm going to meet with Darren Carey. He's one of those that's trying real hard. I believe Ron is. There's several others that are. And there's other ones that just aren't interested, and I don't blame them. They're doing great. I wouldn't be either.
Well, you've got to have all sorts, though. You've got to have your high end, you've got to have your low end,
all
you've got to
about
have the mid
supply.
bracket. And each one of those guys fill that niche, is just trying to make it happen.
Well, and we also have to look at what a starter home really is too. I think everybody wants a starter home that's 2,000 square feet and has granite countertops and 3 bathrooms nowadays.
Yeah, right now.
And it's like maybe being in that 12 to 1,500 square foot range, that 9 to 1,200 square foot range, starter home is really where we need to be focusing a lot of energy too, to really bring down the cost, is have even looking at like the cottage courtyard style stuff and having some different, looking at really some different models that could really make a difference in home ownership. And people still, you know, once you have your foot in the door, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, then you can move up.
Exactly.
But how could this be done in a way that engages the community? Because I think you'll get the buy-in, and they also could put pressure on the builders if they said, hey, you know, I really want to get a home. How can you help me get that home? Find out, is that what the people want?
So a little piece of that came up last week, and I said, do you guys ever do any, you know, research into the retirement community that I'm talking to all the time? They want to downsize. There's no patio homes that are affordable. If there is a patio home, it's $575,000
Right.
in the
Exactly.
ridges, you
Yeah.
know.
Exactly.
And so that doesn't fit. And the Gen Z kids, no, not kids, they're actually older now, are kind of in that lane as well. Do you reach out and talk to those people and see, you know, put some designs in front of them? This is what we're thinking. The cottage court thing, I think, is a great idea. A lot of us are at the point we've had it with deferred maintenance costs, and we are thinking maybe renting is fine if you can get a nice 2-2 with some room and some community, you know, type features in a rental place.
Yeah.
You know, the big box rentals aren't that attractive for a retiree.
Well,
They say
a
when you're paying
retiree-
30,
Yeah.
when you're paying $3,000 and $4,000 a month for rent, that's not attractive.
No, and your income's not going up, and
Right.
the prices you can't control. So that doesn't seem like
That
a
is
very
not an
viable
option.
option
Yeah.
either.
No, it's not. But, you know, so there are, AARP has some great ideas on livable communities that were multi-generational. Fruta actually worked towards that. You know, the ARP guy in the region lives out in Fruta. And Fruta was working towards that. Greg Hinton had no interest in that whole thing. But now I think we do. And Ron Abloh had a lot of interest in that the other day. You know, those cottage things, we could maybe try some of that. But I think there needs to be some community input, some research. We can
Where would we like
help
these?
with
I
that.
mean,
Absolutely,
if you
and
get a
if we
buy-in-
just get the word out, people will give you input.
Because when we had Jason on the other day, it kind of irritated me when you guys had the Mesa College kids, and they came up with their studies, and they gave 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. And I
Weren't
said,
those ADUs?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were ADUs. They were kind of big ADUs, weren't they?
no, these were separate development. And because they asked them, you know, what would you like? And it was for older people. And I thought, and I asked Jason, I said, how many
Anybody-
bathrooms do you have? And he goes, well, 3, but I might not need those many when I get older, and it's just me and my wife. And I'm
You really
thinking,
need them.
do you really want to live with 1 bathroom? I mean, developing that and saying, here, this is what you need. And I think that's when people get angry, is when you start telling them,
What
this
they
is
need.
what you need, instead of what do you want, what can we build, what's affordable.
Well, here's some options.
Yeah.
It's
you go.
we have some apartment buildings, we have some cottage courtyard.
Yeah.
We have a great variety of single family homes, but we can kind of tailor that to who, you know, the young people that want to be downtown, that like being off Main Street. They're going to be okay in an apartment building downtown.
Maybe.
That's what they like.
Mhm.
But as they get married and have kids, they're not staying in the
Gotcha.
junction. They're not staying in the terminal. They want a single family home. So we have to have that inventory spread out so that we can actually move people. You know, we talk a lot about transitional housing, and it always kind of makes me laugh. It's like, what are we transitioning? Are we transitioning from your mom's house to a $400,000 house? Because that's a pretty large gap of transition right there for
Yes,
somebody
indeed.
just getting into the workforce. So actually having that inventory, that wide variety of inventory, that we can transition people throughout their life from one place to another, and have
Or not we can.
they have
can.
the ability.
They
can.
have if they want
We
to.
have
And
the
that
inventory.
in
Yes.
turns makes us more attractive to any outside people
Absolutely.
coming in.
Yeah.
The way it is now, they're going, I don't think so. There's no way I can afford to do this. Or I don't want to live in an apartment downtown on First Street.
Or-
With no parking.
With no parking.
Or I
So-
don't want to drive out to Whitewater.
Exactly.
Because Ron's building those houses with Chaparral West right now out on Whitewater Hill, and I believe they're about $375.
They're affordable.
And
sort of.
they're nice little houses. I mean,
Very nice.
they're nice finishes. They're
Three twos.
Yeah, I mean, they are a great starter home. But if we could do that in Grand Junction,
And okay,
we're on to
so
something.
then we go, what is stopping that?
they're
Right. And,
Yes, and that's
yeah.
what
I said to him, how do we reproduce the Whitewater miracle in Grand Junction?
well, you do it by
So-
changing the zoning, and you do it by changing a lot of that.
That
I
might
mean,
be part of it. But
You have to
yeah,
look
it
at
just
everything
costs
that's
a lot.
going on with the zoning and that kind
yeah.
of thing.
Well, and
It's-
the cost of land is a big piece, and the dirt in Whitewater is always going to be cheaper.
Yep.
But I also wonder too if I look at the way we're handling like the salt flats projects and the sawmill projects, and I question whether or not we could be using those chunks of land at a discounted rate to these builders, so that it isn't just rentals or deed restricted, that it is just free market properties being built. That when they turn over, the value will increase, but we're creating that inventory down here to kind of help stabilize things in the meantime.
and you're creating generational wealth,
Exactly.
Yes.
which is something that rentals just squash.
Yeah, and it's
And-
it's
Oh,
Not only
yeah.
that, but you're bringing in income through taxes and whatnot for the city itself.
Oh, yeah, that's
Well,
a big thing right now.
and
Because all of our multi-units are owned by out of state people for the most part.
Right.
So yeah, all that money just goes flying away. There's no
Away.
churn anymore.
well,
Yeah.
and keeping these kids from CMU in the valley, like actually having homes that when they're off their parents' dime, ready to move into the workforce, we can keep them in our valley and plug them into some of these better jobs to kind of help
Because
sustain.
you'll be attracting outside jobs like your Wincos and
Exactly.
whatever else happens to come along. You can offer those people, hey, we've got the workforce here, and they'll stay here if we have
Exactly.
the housing to
And
keep them here.
And I do think that is one thing that across the entire council, I think every one of us is really focused on housing. Scott brought it up the other night that's his main focus moving forward is housing, and we can't save the world
No,
by any
No.
means.
no,
But if there are buttons that we can push to help, we got to push the buttons.
yeah,
Like we can't fix the entire problem, but we also can't be a contributor.
right,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. Just make us more attractive.
Exactly.
Well, do what you can.
Yeah.
You can't
Just-
do
and just
everything.
do what
you
you
just
can.
Yeah.
do
You
what you can.
can't
Yeah.
And
make
I think engage,
utopia doesn't happen, but
engage more people in to bring in the ideas and expand your why.
You've heard my saying.
What?
The answer is on the street.
Yes.
It's not in
Exactly.
meetings.
Well,
No.
It's not in the newspaper.
Yeah.
It's not on TV. You got to
Yeah.
get out there and talk to people.
and we have to overshare.
Yes.
Sharing isn't enough because the average citizen isn't really. They're not as plugged in as the two of you with all of the different policy and things going on in the city. They're not making it to the council meeting. So oversharing to the point that the average citizen actually knows what's going on in the community, because we have said it so many times that we're blue in the face, so that nobody ever can come back and say, why didn't you tell us that?
Right.
So we've been telling you that for 2 years now, and these are all the different times we've told you. So it's like, it's very clear, it's very transparent, but getting to that level, and it's also something I think is a real strength of Mike Bennett's, is he's a communicator, he's a sharer, he wants transparency.
Well, I wish that Mike Bennett would do his monthly meetings or whatever they are, not at 7:30 in the morning. I mean,
That's a little
why,
hard.
Why can't he do a
Yeah.
different time?
One day a week, you can get up a little early.
I would do something toward you, Scott. But
Why
I'm
not
glad
have
I'm in the
it-
middle
Yeah.
here.
Why not have it in the evenings
Yeah.
when the working class people can get there?
I'll mention it to him.
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, we need both.
And Mike is one of those people that is as receptive as you could really hope, to where he'd be like, oh yeah, that's probably a good idea. Like, there have been times when we have really challenged the status quo and asking for new methodology, new processes, and we've gotten pushback from different people, you know, on council or on staff. And Mike has stepped up and said, this is an opportunity for us to try new things and to look forward, to really be innovative here. He's like, different communities are doing different things, and we can look and see what they're doing, and we can model some of those. And I found that so incredibly refreshing coming from him, that he's the one saying, hey, the status quo, it might be broken, let's try some new things.
Yeah.
And
So-
I kind of like that idea, and the fact that the staff having that kind of input bothers me just a little bit. They're being paid to do a job. They're not being paid to tell you your job. So that bothers me.
That's a touchy one. You
Well,
know,
it
you
does
got to
need to
respect
be more
many of them been there 20, 30 years, you know, and they do get a little stuck in their ways. And
That's
Yeah,
true,
we all
but you
do.
can transition them out of those if you just work at them.
yeah,
You
buckle
do.
up, guys. We're going to change a few things.
There you go.
It's not going to hurt. We're going to probably accomplish something you didn't expect, and you'll get some new ideas out of this. And we need ideas and solutions.
And you
right
won't
Yeah,
have
exactly.
the
Not-
drastic pushback that you're having right
You-
at this moment, because there are calls out there for anything from firing folks to recall folks. You know, if you just calm the waters.
And,
just
and if you look at it, that hasn't always been the case with the city council. And you have to admit that during past years, it's been nobody was paying attention because they weren't doing things that people were saying, what? This is ridiculous. And there's no input to it. And I'll go back to the Sustainability and Adaptation Plan, which is one of my favorites. When you have that you have an open house, you have 2 pop-ups at Farmers Market, you have a meeting at the library, and we engage the community. That is not engagement of the community. That's engagement of a sector.
It needed a little more work, yeah.
And
but
you can't, but
it's
it's a huge policy, and everything goes in, and it can be interpreted differently depending on who's on council. And that's what really disturbs me when I heard at City Council that you guys are going to do the one comprehensive plan. There were 3 great big projects on the next workshop, and one of them was the 2020 comp plan. I think you cannot possibly review that whole plan in a workshop. That is a huge monstrosity
huge.
that's guiding the vision. Why does that have to be done in one segment, and why aren't we bringing in, since there are many things in there that people have gone back and said, what? And like Keith Ellers with the bike and pet plan said, that wasn't what we intended, that wasn't what we said. 4th and 5th was 56th down on priorities, and that became the pilot project. And that's where you get people being upset. They're not engaging, and that's too big of a project to handle in a workshop. Way
Couple
too
hours.
big.
that's the way it works, boy.
But
you know,
why?
it's-
Does
Well,
it have
it
to
doesn't
work
have
like
to be that
But,
way.
but part of that too is that we are expected to do the homework on our own. You know, we are expected to get into the packet and do the research, and you can get a pretty clear idea for if someone has been in the packet or hasn't been in the packet in the meeting, because it just becomes very obvious.
But
So
it
that
doesn't have
is-
to be done that quick, Ben. It does not have to be decided in.
At least take
Well,
one at a time
there's a
instead
lot
of
of
3 big
things.
projects all in one meeting.
Well, not even that 2020 comp plan is really big.
It's
And I
huge.
challenge you, have you read all of the Sustainability and Adaptation Plan? Could you tell me,
Well, I did.
you read the
at
whole
time.
thing
Yeah.
cover to cover and understood the implications of what those decisions would
Well,
result in?
I mean, you got to realize I've been advocating for that for like 8 years as a citizen, you know,
Yeah.
and advocating for those positions and the need for them. And the challenges living in the desert have, and that we're not recognizing. And I mean, we got the comp plan or the sustainability plan, but not a whole lot is happening out of that. Almost nothing right now. I mean, literally, almost nothing is
I
happening.
can tell
out
you
of
what's
there.
happened before it was even passed that comes straight out of that plan. You've got your recycling you've got 4 trucks, you've got
That
4
was kind of
different
a
things.
separate issue too.
That was number 8 in the Sustainability and Adaptation Plan. And you can't tell me that that is actually ecologically friendly when you send out 2 trucks, at least. It used to be, it came around 4 times. But you're sending out trucks each of those trucks, every time they have to pick up a separate bin for recycling, you had recycling available that was as private, and people could recycle. But you've made it more expensive by having the city take over that function. That was they had 4 bins before, but it was one truck, and it cost you $1.50 a month to recycle. This plan, to me, is not more ecologically friendly because you're spending the gas to do that. You're spending the money to buy those trucks, the extra trucks that they had, and then dividing up all of those things when you already had something in place.
It's probably not a perfect system yet, but most of the urban areas have one truck doing it all. So it kind of depends on what they.
Okay, but that's a cost. You'll admit
Absolutely.
that's a cost. And the idea of saying, I want to have you transition on your turf, and the city's gonna provide you with some discount or tax credit or whatever they were saying
It's
in
going to
that
be free.
to be able to transition from that. Have you looked like on Orchard Avenue at what artificial turf looks like in 8 years? And did you know that when you have grass and you have trees, you actually are cooling down the environment as opposed to the other? So it is, but you already had that instead of providing this that isn't accomplishing the same thing.
Well,
you increase the price of parking meters because the goal is to get people to drive less.
Well, that's not sustainability. But let me just jump in real quick. So the revenue from recycling is getting close to breaking even with the cost. So we are making revenue out of those things, and with the new Extended Producer Responsibility Act, we're going to be getting back, and it should be free recycling. The goal is free recycling for everybody in the community. So
well, it's not free because my bill went up quite a bit for sewer and trash. It did, and it continued to go up, and I said,
well,
and they
that's
said,
the
well, this should be
enterprise
the
fund,
third
so they're paying
cycle.
for their big upgrades. I mean, we got the whole new additions to Persego, and we got to protect our water supply. We had old pipes. We got some lead pipes still and all that stuff, but that's their deal. That's separate. So I believe we're going to get there. I believe that it's our patriotic duty to recycle. I mean, why are we we're going to be going to war over rare minerals and steel and aluminum and all that stuff when we can recycle all our stuff here and have those things right now if the whole country chipped in on it. I grew up, with the war generation that my grandparents saved aluminum foil. They took cans down to the junkyard and sold bags of cans. I mean, that's...
And we have gone through that
poor.
before too. When I was in college, same thing. We had paper bags, and that's what you got your groceries in. And if you were to talk to any of the Harvards, Gordon specifically, I remember in a chamber meeting saying, you know about wood? It's recyclable, so it's good. And they were introducing plastic. And so then you say, no, you can't have plastic anymore. We're doing it. We had our meat that you bought at the grocery store. You paid a butcher who was paid well, and it was wrapped in white paper.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have styrofoam and plastic.
Yeah.
And if you look at kids now, when I used cloth diapers, the Pampers and stuff that they use now, that doesn't degrade. But you're saying on one, you're virtue signaling by saying, I'm doing so much for the environment, but I have a plastic water bottle that I get every time, and I buy this in the store instead of going right out there to the tap and getting water in a cup that you can wash. It's just annoying
there's a lot
to
of
see
challenges
this.
to the whole thing. You should have heard some of the recycling things. We had the conference here last week, and to recycle batteries, all that stuff. The other plastics besides 1, 2, 5.
Right.
And I mean, those things are huge challenges. I
Right.
mean, it's kind of a Manhattan Project type thing going on.
Yes,
And because, the government isn't throwing research money into those things anymore, it's private industry trying to come up with the money to solve those problems, but it does take longer when you do it that way. So now I did hear, because of all the plastics, I was down at the University of New Mexico for a graduation, and we were told at the start of the graduation that the university New Mexico does some important research, and it was their scientists that discovered just recently that every human being has a teaspoon of microplastics in their brain.
I would believe it. I would believe it. Well,
I'm not sure what that means for our future, but it was a little disturbing about all the plastics we use and all that stuff. So
Well, it is.
I think we have to keep swinging away at the problem, and we throw so much wood and all that stuff away from the roll-offs at the construction sites. We can absolutely be building homeless housing shelters out of a lot of those things.
Leftover scraps.
We need to be a little bit more resourceful, and a lot of times government gets in the way of a lot of those things. I mean, I have even said recently, I think we've absolutely lost our minds with regulation and laws.
I think so too.
And
And that's a big thing.
There needs to be some kind of recognition of top to bottom regulations in those areas before they push the button on more laws and what the consequences would be.
Right.
So that's a little bit of my hope for AI, is being able to make some of that clear.
Just going back, so what would be your take on a new policy of removing eminent domain from future consent agendas?
I'm not sure if you could do that, quite frankly.
Why couldn't you do that? Because the consent agenda just means there's no discussion. So
No.
Well, it probably should have been pulled too, but something I learned last night that I had not known before, and I think that they're actually going to start putting it on the agenda moving forward, is that members of the audience also have the right to pull something from the consent agenda. So if you are in the meeting,
The county can do that.
yeah, and you're actually allowed to in city as well. It's just something that doesn't happen. So if you're a speaker and you hear something on the consent agenda you don't like, you can say, I'd like to pull that from the consent agenda for
I
discussion.
don't think the
That's what Mike and
audience
John
can.
said last night after the meeting.
So why the hell can't we do
So
that?
I think they're actually,
You
we
just
talked
didn't
about
know you
having,
could do it.
yeah, it was just, so I think they might actually
County,
add
we
that
always
onto the
did.
agenda.
I pulled a lot of things at the county off.
Yeah.
Huh.
But having that ability so it's not just, because it's also hard for us to truly know the implications of all decisions. Eminent domain's one thing, but even like the zoning stuff, for us, we're looking at a lot of the zoning from cut and dry legalistic view of whether it meets the zoning standards or not, where to the person standing out in the audience that's trying to change a property for their personal use, it's a much more personal thing. They're looking at why can't we do this? And we're just looking at the legalistic aspect of it. So having somebody even in the audience be able to pull something off the agenda to say we need further discussion, or you guys need to spend more time on this, I think is important. I think us also having the ability to pump the brakes on things in certain situations and say there's certain times we got to make decisions. There's also certain times we have to slow down and gather more information.
And sometimes you don't really realize that until somebody says something. Oh, wait, maybe we should.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of times too, it's, staff will bring us the options. So we're looking between three different options
Exactly.
that we maybe don't really care for any of them, or we could see a different option that might work better. So taking the time to pump the brakes in those situations and ask staff for more information, or ask staff to bring forward a plan that looks a little bit differently, I think can be very beneficial for us as well.
Or maybe asking the staff, okay, dividing it up more in a step by step. This is what we wanted before they spend a lot of time, because you said it becomes your baby. And it's like when I write something, by the time I'm done writing it, I don't want you to critique it even after I asked you to. Because
That's a fact. That's a
I
fact.
spent so much time writing it. I don't want you to work on
It's
that.
true.
So instead of doing it all at once, and again, just saying, is this really necessary? And have questions that before you start. How much will it cost? What's the buy-in for this? What's the benefit of this?
Why?
Why are we doing
Why
this?
are we doing
Why are
this?
we doing it?
What's the problem we're trying to solve?
And is there a problem? I mean, is there actually a
I
problem?
wouldn't get too hung up on the eminent domain thing. I mean, it's a serious issue, but I think this was probably the first one in a long time.
But what would be the
It's the
problem with doing it
last
that way?
resort. And we don't want to do it because it's not
So
good for the public.
I had spoke a little bit with John and Mike last night as well about that, about handling this differently in the future, and I think it is something we'll probably talk about a little bit at some point, just to see
'Cause you don't want
how
that to
we
happen
can have
again.
well, and just making sure we're oversharing.
Mm-hmm.
From day one we're oversharing. It's just being overly transparent diffuses so many situations and takes the power. It's the conversations I've had with you, before I decided to run for council, when you and I sat together and talked about the resource center. The fact that I was able to have that dialogue with you diffused so many situations that if we were firing emails back and forth back,
Yes.
it would have
Yes.
been very,
Or
very
text.
different. So we have to overshare. We have to be community facing. We have to be having these conversations, and we have to make phone calls too. There are things like with 4th and 5th Street. There are half a dozen to a dozen phone calls I wish I would have made before that meeting. I wish I would have talked to the two of you. I wish I would have talked to some of our supporters to really let them know, like, hey, this is where I am on this. I don't know how I'm voting, but I want you to know so that you're not shocked because you think we're coming at this one way, and then in the meeting it comes in a completely different situation.
Exactly.
Especially if it's something when I can come to the two of you beforehand and say, this is what touched my heart. These community members between Grand and North Avenue, not the ones that were angry and called us stupid, but the ones that said, hey, our lives have really, really improved. My kids can walk to the park. There haven't been any car accidents on our front yard. These really basic things that we would hope to have in our neighborhood, to actually pull the rug out from them after giving it to them for a year just seems so cruel. But for all of our supporters who we'd been speaking with for so long about, hey, we need to roll this back, we need to change this, for them it seems like this,
Well, it was.
traitorous.
It
It
was
wasn't.
betrayal.
It wasn't.
It was
seeming like
betrayal.
Well, it
that's-
was, but
Yeah.
but we had also spoke to being a true community advocate and really listening to our community and really engaging with our community.
And that didn't come across. There was a disconnect, a
No.
big disconnect.
And
No.
and that's where we could have done better, because we could have had these conversations. I could have came on here and I could have told you about the emails we were receiving, and we had about a 2-week span that we probably had 200 to 300 emails, I'd imagine, and phone
It
calls,
wasn't quite
and
that many,
it
but
was
quite a few.
every single day was 5 or 6 different emails
And voice
and voice messages, and a lot of them were just really community members that had seen improvement in their neighborhood and were afraid that was going to go away. And it wasn't, and when we first went into it, my perspective on it was, you don't buy a house next to the interstate and complain about traffic. But if you buy a house next to the interstate and then they move the interstate away from you for a year, and you really get used to life without the interstate, and then the interstate gets moved back, it's probably a real painful experience. And I think that's what these people were going through, is that we did give it to them, we did improve their lives, and then just to rip that carpet out from under them, to say, hey, you're not as important as this business section downtown. We're going to listen to this segment more. So that's where I felt like we really won, by trying to bifurcate the situation and really listening to not only the concerns of the downtown business owners, but the concerns of the North residents as well. And hearing these different complaints, they all were separate. Everybody from North to Grand was talking about how speed through their neighborhood was impacting their lives and making them feel unsafe. And everybody from Grand to Pitkin was talking about parking and access and how the Ballards made things
It was
confusing.
very clear, yeah.
Yeah, so we really felt like we found a compromise that truly answered all the questions, answered all the complaints. And it was hard because it wasn't the winners and the losers, and it wasn't the vindication of the election that we all hoped, but it was really how this government, how our local government's supposed to work to really try to bifurcate the situation and fix it for everybody and try to find solutions that work for everybody. And I'm really hopeful that we will find some. I think it's still a little bit of an open conversation on what happens between Grand and Pitkin. But I think we're going to find some real solutions that work really well for the customers, the business owners, and we're doing it from a different perspective now of engaging them and talking to them. And really, Cody and I spent last Friday on Main Street meeting with different business owners and just walking around and letting them point out the things that are affecting them. And that's kind of what brought me to, with the parking conversation, and I'll give Anna credit, it was actually her idea, but looking at parking block by block throughout the corridor, because everybody block by block is dealing with different issues. The complaints aren't the same from one place to the other. So if we can really find a compromise that works great for our downtown area, also saves these residents, moves traffic through Orchard Mesa well, I think we've got a victory. It's just, this is really hard.
I'm going to interrupt you though,
Yeah.
but what you're missing is all of the people that don't come downtown anymore. Like when Trout's saying, well, the people that are here, well, there's a number of people that don't come down, their voice isn't being heard, and I can tell you my neighbor over here, she said, I really like brown shoe fit. I will not go downtown because I am afraid to drive. So you don't know how she feels about the new thing or what you're proposing, because she's no longer going downtown. She said, if you take me, I'll go and park with me, and I will. I mean, because I think Brown's is a really good shoe shop, especially for her. But you don't know the people that have said, we're done. We're done with downtown.
And it'll take, some people might not come back. Some
But you
people,
don't, what I'm saying is you don't know how those people are feeling. And so you need to reach out to them too and say, what would it take for you to come back downtown? Because they were your shoppers.
And that's something we talked about through this parking conversation as well, that it's not just talking to the business owners and the employees of the downtown area, it's the consumer as well. It's the person that hit the post office. Yeah, the person that hit the post office and then went down and walked. The people that would park in the Colorado Avenue lot and hit Browns and going up and down. Like I completely agree. And I one thing I have no doubt that this current council is going to do better than what we've seen previously is the community engagement. Every single person up there on that dais, really, when they say community engagement is important to them, I honestly believe it. Like, especially the people that ran when I ran, I can say for a fact that
I have never seen Anna Stout reach out.
And I won't talk about it.
Everybody, you said everybody on the dais.
But
That's where we're going. Everybody on the dais is not feeling that way.
But I think we have, and I won't talk about individuals, but as a majority of the people up there, I really feel that community engagement is at the heart of everyone up there. And Scott being a previous, Scott and Cody were the two that were willing to engage.
And I agree with that, Scott.
That we're out there talking to people.
Take
Did you hear that?
Yes.
I always say that.
So if we can add another 3 and have 5+ of us, and I think the others will do the same, that are really trying to advocate for our community, we can rebuild so much trust. It's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to take a little bit of healing, and it's going to take us treating each other well and not dressing each other down on the dais and treating each other respectfully and having respectful arguments that actually get us to a place of compromise. And I think when the community sees us treat each other that way and sees us out in the community engaging and gathering information and talking to people, we can really heal a lot of this. And I understand the pain right now. I understand the frustration. When the two of you speak at a city council meeting and you're hurt, your soul hurts, you're frustrated with us, that hurts my heart. I went home after that meeting, the first meeting when the two of you spoke, and I told my wife, I said, I feel like I made the right decision, but I feel terrible. I feel terrible.
Sometimes that works out.
These are people that I really care for, that I really respect, that I really think are honorable people in our community who we've let down, and it hurts. it hurts. I mean, it's a different level of hurt than I think I've really experienced, because it's just feeling that I did the right thing, but knowing I let so many people down, and that these are people that I really align with in a lot of ways, but also being able to have these conversations so that I can show you, like, hey, this is where my heart is. I didn't run on one thing and try to turn a different way. I got new information that affected my heart, and I felt pressured to make a decision based on that new information. And being able to sit with people in our community and actually have that conversation and explain that can go so far, because it just takes the air out of a lot of these conversations. And we do recognize, like, hey, yeah, we're neighbors at the end of the day. We aren't going to agree on everything, but if we can work together to find some common ground, I mean, this can be a much better place than what we've had.
Yeah, the only thing I can say is that it should have been done sooner.
We'll get there.
And the other thing is that when you're, again, it is looking at consequences for everybody. When you're looking at something that sounds good and say, oh, that sounds really good, and then going back and saying, okay, is this really good? Or, do I have all the information? Because actually, with 5th Street going up there, that particular park is, we've driven by, and a friend of mine goes by there every single day.
Hawthorne.
There's nobody there. I found
The
a
other
couple
day
of
I was there,
homeless
and the
people,
whole.
but not families. Not
Yeah.
families there.
The other day I was there, and there was a whole bunch of people in the shelter sleeping on the
It was
benches.
hot, yeah.
I mean, no, it wasn't just hot. These were homeless people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
And
There
then
were-
when you have the
It was hot there
bathroom,
in the
you
shade.
know it's not a real bathroom, because they have a porta potty, because the bathroom is, they can't trust it to be
Yeah,
open.
well, that's
A whole
a
other ballgame, right?
huge problem.
But
I'm not
it's
sure how to solve
it's a
it.
problem when you're saying, those people are saying, I'm coming to the park, and you're not coming to
Yeah,
the
and
park.
they can't find a bathroom.
Yeah. No, but I get it. But I also think if we,
I'm just saying, looking at everything.
Yeah.
Taking time, stepping back, getting from a whole bunch of different venues, and then saying what's the best decision. Because even when you made that choice to change your mind, say, this is what I'm seeing, how about what are you seeing? And, so you have some feedback. You don't just have, because that's what happens. We come and tell you our point, and then somebody else comes and tells you their point. But if you have a balance of that and say, okay, here are all the points, let's put them on the table and let's discuss them.
yep,
Not with just yourself.
and pumping the brakes to make sure we have that.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's our responsibility to engage. It's our responsibility to gather that information, and if we don't feel comfortable making a decision with the information we have,
Say, stop. We don't have to make this
Yeah.
decision tomorrow.
Yeah.
And do that. Well, we really appreciate you guys being on, and
Absolutely.
especially you. You're our favorite. You know that.
No, I did not.
You are. I love talking to you, because I feel like I could say whatever and you don't get mad, and you just
You
just
just
Right,
had
I
it.
know.
you take the information in, and sometimes you change your mind a little bit, and sometimes you don't.
Oh, absolutely. It's an evolutionary process.
Yes.
Hey, I want you guys to put, I don't know, Ben feels, but at the end of this, put our emails and our phone numbers up there.
It will be done.
We welcome people to reach
Absolutely.
out to us.
I can do that when I tag you.
Yeah.
the city card.
Put the city email and put you have my cell phone number.
Yep.
That's one I use.
Yep.
My
That
personal
one's-
one, so.
a little different information than you guys have previously.
Oh,
You're still
okay.
welcome to contact
Okay.
me on any, but if you share information, share that one instead of my
Okay.
personal cell
Alright.
phone.
That one, that's my job, is to do the sharing. So
Yeah. I'm not technical.
But you guys can still reach out
I use my
anytime.
personal
Okay.
one, so.
Well, you've been watching Mesa County Compass. This is the facts as we know them, the truth as we see it. You decide.
thank you both for coming on. We do
Thank
appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you for having
Yeah.
us, and thank you for doing it. It's a great way to get a little extra information out. Well, and it's another way for us to overshare. If we're coming on here, we can
People have to
overshare.
There
hear
you
it
go.
many
Yeah.
times.
And well, it gives
Exactly.
people more depth than just this 3 minutes.